Can you switch off your audio?
मुझे वो दे दो मेरा कुछ लैंग्वेज में.
Good morning, everyone. This is Evangelos Kyriakidis from the Heritage Management Organization, and I am delighted to be the moderator of today's session. This is a pre-event to the Sustainable Tourism Forum organized by the ICCIA, an affiliated organization to the Organization of Islamic Council, and destination events. The event today is on heritage and cultural sustainability, and I'm delighted that we are all here today in such an illustrious group. And I just want to say just a couple of words on what is the Sustainable Tourism Forum, next iteration of which will be in September. The forum brings together experts, thought leaders, and stakeholders from the tourism industry and its allied sectors to share knowledge and experiences and to collaborate on best practices and innovative solutions for a more sustainable future. The forum's agenda includes a range of topics related to sustainable tourism, including ecotourism, community-based tourism, cultural tourism, sustainable tourism policies and governance, as well as the intersection of tourism with other industries such as hospitality, aviation, and technology. As today we are going to be talking about heritage and cultural sustainability, you are going to hear a lot about economy and development from all of us, including myself. But I would really like you to all have in mind that culture and heritage are the aim and not the means. Money and development is the means. And so heritage is a key constituent of our own identity. And on the one hand, we have to leverage it to improve our lives. On the other hand, we must preserve it to ensure that we continue being who we are. And so I will start with the first speaker, who is Osama El Nahas, who is a heritage expert in the Islamic World Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, ISESCO, that has 54 members, and he is also a lecturer of maritime and underwater archaeology. Previously, he's occupied several high administrative positions, mainly in Egypt, in the Ministry of Antiquities, such as supervision of the exhibition galleries in the Grand Museum, supervisor of the Minister's Technical Office, supervisor of the Central Department for Underwater Antiquities, the supervisor of the Underwater Museum and Maritime Antiquities Center in Alexandria, director of General Department of Repatriation of Antiquities, director general of Department of International Organization Affairs, and the Department of Antiquities Exhibition Abroad. So Osama is, as you hear, extremely experienced, and most recently he has been looking into a couple of things. One is the effect of carbon on heritage sites and museums, but also he's very interested in how we bring in heritage into the SDG discussion, into the Sustainable Development Goal discussion. So without further ado, Osama.
Thank you very much, Professor Evangelos, for this presentation. First of all, I would like to thank all the Chamber of Industry and Agriculture and Islamic World Organization, Islamic Organization, OIC. Today, I'm going to speak about the role of Heritage Center at Islamic Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, ISESCO, in achieving sustainable development goals and heritage and tourism sustainability. In its new vision and recognition of the importance of heritage in preserving the identity of a nation and people, considering it a cornerstone for achieving sustainable development goals, ISISCO established the Heritage Center in Islamic world to serve as exemplary model. The center is not only for managing heritage in Islamic world, but also for protecting, preserving, rehabilitating, restitution stolen artifacts, and utilizing them to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals declared by the United Nations. ISISCO prioritized this center incorporating various initiatives, activities, and programs in its action plans to achieve the mentioned goals. It declared its initiative to consider cultural heritage, including heritage, as the 18th goal of SDGs. In August 2023, ISISCO submitted this document outlining this initiative to the United Nations for the study and consideration. In achieving the most, ISISCO acknowledged that the heritage may be the greatest common factor in achieving most of the SDGs and sustainability of tourism, recognizing tourism as a major driver of sustainable development, especially cultural tourism. ISISCO included initiatives, programs, and activities in its strategic plan of Heritage Center to contribute to any of the 17 SDGs. Among the announced activities, the Heritage Center contributes to the restoration and rehabilitation of heritage sites and museums, monitoring, protecting, and documenting them. This ensures the creation of numerous jobs, contributing to achieving the first and second goal, eradicating poverty and hunger. This work not only helps to achieve these two goals, but also the third goal of good health and well-being, the fifth goal of gender equality, the eighth goal of decent work and economic growth, and the 10th goal of reducing inequality. In terms of training and capacity building in heritage-related fields, the Heritage Center has launched numerous training programs and workshops in both tangible and intangible heritage. These programs cover submerged heritage, cultural property protection, crisis and disaster management, and using modern technology like photogrammetry, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality and metaverse for recording, for documentation of the heritage site, and also for the protecting the heritage sites. This contributes to the achieving the fourth goal of equality education, and the fifth goal and 10th goal of gender equality and reducing inequality. To achieve the second goal of clean energy, ISISCO initiated the use of solar energy in heritage sites and museums during its active participation in the climate conference in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, COP27, 2 years ago, in COP27 in 2022. And also, this was done in partnership with UNESCO and the United Nations Development Program and the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. This initiative contributed to achieving the 7th and 17th goal, forming partnership to achieve the projects and activities. Emphasizing equality and non-discrimination, ISISCO changed the name of the Islamic Heritage Committee to Heritage Committee in the Islamic World, covering all types of heritage, regardless of the historical period, ethnic, or religious affiliation. This inscription includes Islamic sites, Christian churches, Jewish temples, and other within the member countries, promoting tourism and contributing to economic and heritage sustainability. The rehabilitation and preservation of heritage sites directly placed this landmark on the international tourism map, ensuring economic heritage and tourism sustainability. In alignment with the rapid and ongoing technological revolution, ISISCO established within its Heritage Center the first specialized unit in using artificial intelligence and metaverse technologies for heritage purposes. This unit aims to protect, document, preserve, and maintain heritage sites and elements. To achieve this objective, various training courses have been conducted for this purpose and inshallah, hopefully within 2 months, we will hold an international conference on the same topic in using artificial intelligence and metaverse in heritage fields. This will be held in the headquarters of Cisco and Rabat within 2 months, probably in March. These activities contribute to achieving the ninth goal of related to industry and innovation, as well as goals such as poverty and hunger reduction, quality education, gender equality, and decent work. Moving on to the 11th goal concerning sustainable cities and communities, which includes heritage, Cisco has assisted in protecting historical and heritage sites through the programs like inscription on the World Heritage List. And also, we have our list, Islamic World Heritage List. This initiative aims to preserve, protect, rehabilitate, and restore these sites, placing them on the international tourism map and achieving both heritage and tourism sustainability. Examples includes the ancient cities of Rabat, Tunis, Kairouan, historic Cairo, Daraya, Al-Ihsa Oasis, Kufa, and others. To address the 13th goal related to the climate action, ICISCO has played a significant role by participating in climate conferences, as mentioned before, such as COP27, Sharm el-Sheikh, and preparation for the active participation in COP29, and also participating in COP28 in Dubai, 2023. Initiatives include the establishment of funds in collaboration with the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities to address the impact of climate change on heritage sites. Additionally, Cisco launched initiatives for carbon emission reduction and carbon footprint measurement in heritage sites and museums globally. The organization, representing 54 state members, has also been active in cultural initiative for climate action and launched initiative to monitoring the impact of climate change and natural disaster on heritage sites and museums using artificial intelligence and remote sensing. In pursuit of the 17th goals of partnership, ICISCO is an open organization engaging with various international organizations working in heritage, museums, and environmental fields. It has formed ambitious partnership with organizations such as the United Nations, UNESCO, ICOM, and ICOMOS. Addressing the 14th goal regarding oceans and underwater life, a comprehensive project is proposed for the establishment of an integrated underwater and maritime center in the ancient site of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, Pharos. This site is one of the most marvelous of the ancient world, wonders of the ancient world. This project aims as to create inclusive center with an underwater museum, underwater park, a museum for maritime artifacts lifted from the underwater, and an open-air museum for artifacts recovered from the sea, and a garden for underwater recovered anchors. And Center for Maritime Heritage Crafts to be the Center for Intangible Heritage for the maritime life. And also, lastly but not last, a training center in coastal and underwater archaeological excavation. This multifaceted center contributes to achieving various sustainable development goals and ensure the sustainability of important underwater heritage sites globally, enhancing their tourism sustainability. In conclusion, these initiatives and project Cisco through these initiatives and projects, Cisco is actively contributing to the achievement of multiple sustainable development goals, fostering innovation, cultural preservation, climate action, and international collaboration for the sustainable future. Thank you very much for your kind listening.
Thank you very much, Osama. And this is a very interesting example of how sustainable goals can actually be used to communicate the impact of our work. And we are going straight away to a second speaker who is not here with us, but has recorded his talk Chris Flynn from Australia, who is the founder and executive chairman of the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, a position that requires being the liaison at the most senior levels of industry, government, and academia. With decades of executive level experience in international tourism and aviation, and having worked in a wide range of countries across 4 continents, Chris has developed an intimate knowledge of the industry and the requirements needed to identify critical trends that have the potential to influence development and expansion. He's regularly been contributing to various media, including the BBC World News Asia Business Report, and educating our future industry leaders is one of his key passions. So we will now listen to his presentation.
Recorded a presentation for you which focuses on responsible and sustainable tourism growth for the future. My presentation today is called The Future of Tourism Growth: Responsible, Sustainable, or Regrettable. Now, you might find that to be a bit of a strange title, but as we work through this presentation, I hope you understand the points I'm trying to make on why it's so important today to have our plans and our strategies so robust that we don't impact the very thing that we're trying to promote. Before I begin, I'd like to share some numbers with you, which I would like you to keep in the back of your mind. These were taken from 2019, pre-COVID. And what we know about 2019 is the world produced 1.5 billion international tourist arrivals that year. 47% of those tourist arrivals had a cultural component to their itinerary, which means that we generated round about 705 million cultural heritage travelers, which generated 1.5 trillion US dollars. Now that, if you're focused on cultural heritage tourism, should grab your attention. When we look at cultural heritage tourism, it is the foundation of the modern era of our industry. And in fact, in a modern sense, it began in the 17th century, when, as the Industrial Revolution in Europe began, people wanted to venture out to some of the more iconic cities of Europe, some of those that had a very real heritage component, such as Venice. And when we actually look at the way the Industrial Revolution grew and wealth became more important and travel became more important, then we saw more people traveling to these destinations such as Venice. And then they would go further afield like this to Egypt and other places. So as we look at the foundation of our industry, whether it's the iconic and enigmatic pyramids of Egypt or the beautiful canals of Venice, when we look around the world, we see that it's the uniqueness of people, the uniqueness of place, the culture, the history, and the heritage of a destination that has driven tourism growth on our branding and our marketing in the past and continues to do so today. When we look at tourism growth today, we know that the forecast predicts 1.8 billion international tourist arrivals by 2030. In actual fact, what we've seen is that it was estimated by 2020 we would reach 1.4 billion. In actual fact, we reached that figure in 2019, 2 years ahead of schedule. And if we would have continued on that trajectory, we would have reached 1.8 billion by around 2025. But as we know, COVID-19 struck and brought our industry to our knees. During this period, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about how to reset tourism, what we need to do to be more responsible and more sustainable for the future, and the plans that we had in place for the future of our industry. However, last year, we saw this number in the media, 997. This was by UNWTO, and they were saying that we produced in 2022 997 million international tourists. In fact, when we look at the planned trajectory of recovery, they estimate that we will reach 2019 figures either by the end of 2023 or certainly within 2024, this year. You see, traditionally, the success of a destination has been measured on the number of visitors we welcomed. And when we look back at that year, which was celebrated as the best year ever for tourism, we produced, as I said earlier, 1.5 billion international tourists. Now let's get some perspective on that. If I was to take away 1 million seconds away from today, I would end up with about 12 days. If I take 1.5 billion seconds away from today, I end up with 33 years. So when we start talking in billions, you can kind of feel the pressure that our industry is putting on some destinations around the world. That figure was a 4% change year on year from 2018 and equated to about 4 million arrivals per day. So let's have a look at what 4 million arrivals a day actually looks at. Here we see those beautiful enigmatic canals of Venice, not exactly what's on the postcard, or here that are sacred sites around the world. Wherever we look, we see tourism growth and over-tourism. This is Mount Fuji in Japan, and you wouldn't think that that would be suffering from over-tourism, but every day, this is how the mountain looks, and it's a sacred mountain. The big issue we have with Mount Fuji is the fact that there's a trend to get to the peak of the mountain before daylight, so you can get that dawn shot. So at night, this is how it looks. And there's increasing pressure and issues on local authorities because of this, because there's more injury, because there's people with hypothermia, etc. So this is the problem. And of course, the debris they leave needs to be cleared up every day. But as I say, wherever we look, whether it's our beaches, whether it's our historic sites, whether it's somewhere you live or somewhere you're staying, it doesn't really matter. There's a crowd just about everywhere. And if you happen to be where people can get that perfect shot for their Instagram account, well, good luck. But it's not just destinations. It's our institutions, our museums, our art galleries, etc. Everywhere we look, we seem to be finding more and more issues. And this is being reflected in people's sentiment. Again, we're starting to see this all around the world. Tourist, your luxury trip, my daily misery. Let's expand that shot. And this is what the gentleman is looking at. Here, in a village in Germany. In Mallorca, in Spain, tourism kills Mallorca. Tourists are terrorists. We want our weekends back. Respect our culture. Tourists go home. This is in Barcelona. The irony is here is this became a tourism attraction in its own right. I have a question, and that is, what we're seeing around the world, does it align with the Sustainable Tourism Development Goals, which we hear so much about? I'll let you decide on that. But this is now a global problem, and it's due to a lack of forward planning on appropriate tourism strategies. Government resource management and support. You see, tourism is not all about marketing. It's a whole of government issue. And we need to factor in things like water and power and telecommunications to ensure that we have the right infrastructure in place for responsible tourism growth. It's about asset management and restrictions, visitor flows and arrival monitoring, site access and limitations. And of course, you can't do all of that unless you have carrying capacity awareness. So you understand what you can take before you break. If you don't know what your destination or your exhibit can take before you actually open the gates, then you're in trouble before you even begin. We need to have better community engagement, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And of course, better traveler education or cultural information. And the reason for this is we're seeing more and more issues with vandalism, with destruction of cultural sites, and with abuse of belief systems and cultural heritage in general. One of the big problems is that our industry has always put profit over people in place. But in actual fact, what we should be looking at is prosperity. Prosperity for all. And the funny thing is, if we put people and place together, it equals prosperity because it's about sharing, about equitable sharing. It's about community engagement. It's about building pride in those communities. It's about having a responsible approach to tourism growth and development. Now, you see, responsible and sustainable tourism development requires a number of things. And very simply, we need to find ways to reduce visitor pressure on popular destinations, minimize the negative impact on local communities, engage with local community to be part of the solution. Too often, we see that local communities are not part of that equation. So it builds a resentment within those communities. We need to create evidence-based carrying capacity plans that better allow us to plan for future visitor growth. If you know your carrying capacity, then you can seek to invest in the future because you know what to expect. We need to develop a 365-day visitor program, not just during peak periods. We need to encourage greater regional dispersal. And this, of course, has been seen as one of the solutions for over-tourism. And it can be. The issue is here, though, unless the places and the people know how to manage tourism where you want to disperse visitors to, then all you're doing is pushing the problem somewhere else, and it'll only get bigger. And of course, we need to increase protection and preservation of our cultural heritage assets. Once these assets have disappeared, and they are disappearing at an alarming rate around the world, then they're gone for good. You can't recreate them, you can't plant them, you can't grow them. They vanish, they become extinct. So responsible tourism growth begins with engaging local communities as equal stakeholders. They need to be part of the solution and they need to be rewarded for their contribution. We need to provide advice on the key benefits of cultural heritage tourism development, but also the potential issues with it, because there are some, as we can see. We need to listen and act on their concerns and perceptions. And there's a reason for this. You see, most communities don't mind tourism. What they do mind is when tourism is done to them without their consent or consideration. We need to have appropriate training on key aspects of developing, managing, and succeeding in a tourism business. Again, if we are going to disperse travelers, then it's only right that wherever we disperse them to, the local population understand how to manage that and how to benefit from it in a way that sustains their livelihood and improves their social economic conditions. And we need to ensure they have enough government, local ministerial or international donor support to enable them to plan financially for multiple years ahead. Too often I've seen, particularly in the South Pacific, where SMEs and family businesses have created a business only to understand that there isn't enough funds to allow them to upgrade it or to improve it as the years go on. And what happens then is they have issues as it begins to run down. At WETAC, the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, we have what we call the 6 C's of responsible and sustainable tourism development. That is community engagement, carrying capacity awareness, cultural sensitivity, commercial education and skills training, collaboration, particularly with industry, and coordination with local governments and financial institutions, etc. The 6 C's run all the way through our training programs because these are the fundamental things that we need to do and to consider if we are to build responsible and sustainable tourism plans. But if we get it right, what do we achieve? Well, we improve the lives and livelihoods of local communities. We create stable and sustainable local economies. We provide a 365-day revenue stream, not just during peak seasons. We rebuild community pride. We preserve local traditions and ways of life. We help protect and promote unique cultural heritage, tangible and intangible assets. Both are so important. and we establish platforms to broaden their tourism programs, such as local festivals, cultural celebrations, food, ceremonies, etc. Most importantly, we build a sustainable future for generations to come. You see, the future of our industry is about preserving our history and our heritage, about respecting our sacred sites and beliefs, engaging our local communities, and preserving our unique living cultures. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much
I'd
to
like to
Chris.
thank you for giving me the time to present to you today. I wish you well, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this very important webinar. Thank you very much.
And thanks to Chris for putting together this very good presentation that raises a lot of the issues that we are really thinking about when we are dealing with tourism and any type of sustainable development when it comes to heritage. So it's very apt that I now will present Donovan Rupkema, who is the president of Heritage Strategies International. He has been working at the nexus of heritage conservation and economic development. And he has undertaken assignments in almost all the US states and in more than 50 countries. He has written the book called The Economics of Historic Preservation, which has been translated into many languages, including Russian, Georgian, Korean. And he also serves on the Real Estate Market Advisory Group of the UN Economic Commission for Europe and the Board of Directors for Global Urban Development and on the Advisory Board of Doha. Donovan is currently teaching a graduate course in preservation economics at the University of Pennsylvania, where he has received the Perkins Award for distinguished teaching. And he's also received the Crownie Shield Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the highest preservation honor in the United States, for which he has awarded for lifetime contributions to historic preservation. Donovan is really touching on one of the key issues that all heritage professionals are trying to touch. It's a very difficult topic. And if you speak to people that have been working on finance, for example, they will find it very hard to put their finger on things. So we are extremely privileged to have you here, Donovan. And thank you for making the time very early in the morning to be with us.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me okay?
Not very well. If you could speak louder, that'd be great.
Is this working? Is this better?
Yes.
Now I can't hear you, but I guess I can last for hearing myself. My apologies for being late, and it's not that I'm an idiot and can't get up at the right time in the morning. It's that I can't get up on the right day. So I had tomorrow as the day for the webinar. So when I get a 3:30 in the morning call saying, "Oh, where are you? You're supposed to be here." So my apologies. I have to start out with a confession in that our firm, we don't consider ourselves at all tourism experts. We work, as mentioned, we work at the intersection of heritage conservation and economics, and most of our work is in measuring those impacts. And when we have to, we include tourism impact, and they are very significant heritage, and I'll mention a couple of things about that. But what we think is really important, and which I wish that you would all understand, is that tourism is one of the economic aspects and impacts of cultural heritage, but it's not the only one by far. You'll all recall that when the sustainable concept of sustainable development was first created at the UN in Rio 40, 50 years ago, from the beginning, sustainable development was about responsibility, and was about the three responsibilities. It was certainly about environmental responsibility, but it was also about economic responsibility and about social and cultural responsibility. And I don't know in your countries, but honestly, in my country, the environmentalists, God bless them, but have for 50 years kind of captured the whole concept of sustainable development, thinking that's only the environmental component, and it's not. It's all three of these components. And in much of Western Europe and in the UAE, they've in fact added the fourth pillar of sustainable development, being culture. And there's an ongoing debate of whether culture is part of all of them. But the point is that there's this increasing recognition about how important heritage conservation is in sustainable development, and recognizing both in the last declaration of the goals of sustainable development goals, but also in the new urban agenda of UN Habitat, where it's a key component of those goals. So what I'd like to do in my short time is a couple things. One, I never much care about being right, but I like to be consistent. And a number of things that you heard from both of the two previous speakers, I just like to reinforce in terms of consistency. And I want to give you a kind of stupid analogy, and I'll apologize for it in advance. But I grew up in western South Dakota in the United States, and my dad in part was in the cattle business. And in the area of the country where his ranch was, there was a carrying capacity of about 20 pair, and a pair is a cow and her calf. And you needed 20 acres because there wasn't much rainfall, so there wasn't much grass. You needed 20 acres for this cow and the calf to prosper for a year. Now, for a year or for two, you could get by using fewer acres per pair. You could do it, and you'd make more money. But starting in the third year and then getting worse after that is then the process got worse. You damaged yourself. There would be fewer calves that were born healthy. The calves that were raised would be smaller. And so it was this declining returns. And that's really comparable to what happens when you don't pay attention to carrying capacity in heritage resources. You make more money early on, but in the long run, on the underlying asset upon which that prosperity depends declines, and that is the consequences of overshooting the carrying capacity. And we have to remember that heritage resources are inherently fragile. That's not true of everything, but they're inherently fragile resources. And the other thing I think that's really fundamental to thinking about heritage visitation as compared to other forms of the tourism industry is, if I'm a tourism entrepreneur and I build a golf course, I'm responsible. I created that golf course. Or if I create an amusement park, I was the one whose capital built that resource. And so to a large extent, I can say I can do with what I want with my golf course. I paid to build my golf course. Heritage is never that way. In fact, the tourism entrepreneurs at every level are not the ones responsible for creating the asset that draws the visitors. And so this issue about the importance of community involvement in that process is not just kind of from a practical point of view. There's a fundamental level of equity in that, because those heritage resources belong to all of us. They do not belong to that particular tourism entrepreneur, and that's why that involvement is really important. But again, we're not tourism experts, so what I want to do is just step back for a second and suggest to you why heritage conservation in general, in fact, ought to be thought of as the very core, as the very epitome of the comprehensive approach of sustainable development. So from the environmental side, increasingly there's this understanding of and measurement of embodied energy. We're worried about the world running out of energy, but in fact, when we have these heritage buildings in place, we've already incorporated that energy. And what happens when we lose those resources, when we tear down an historic building, in fact, we are throwing away the energy that's already been bodied, been spent, been invested, and then we're replacing it with a huge additional new investment in energy. Sometimes, again, I'll only give you a U.S. example here, but the environmental world will say, oh, you got to get rid of those old buildings. They're energy hogs and they're energy inefficient, and we have to replace them with some green gizmo building. Well, in fact, systematic analysis shows that, in fact, older buildings are more conservative in the use of their energy. They're more responsible in the use of the energy because heritage buildings were designed at a time when you couldn't simply flip a switch and have a place heated up. That the designers, the builders, the contractors, the architects had to think about that context when they designed and built the building. And they built it to respond to the local environment, and that's environmental responsibility. On the economic side, what we learned in analyses in a number of countries is a couple things. One is there is a labor intensity in the rehabilitation of heritage buildings that is greater than new construction. Again, the kind of rule of thumb here in the U.S. is that a new building is half labor and half materials, the expenditure. If you rehabilitate a heritage building, that 60 to 70% of that expenditure is for labor. And what the difference between expenditures for labor and expenditures material is that the labor expenditures is bought from across the street, not across the world, and that has its own environmental impact. But it also means that you're recirculating many more of those dollars when you spend it on labor as opposed to materials in that local economy. If you install a sink, once the sink is installed, the sink doesn't spend any more money, but the plumber who installed the sink does, and he or she spends their money in that local economy. And so there's much larger, because of this labor intensity, lower local economic impact from heritage rehabilitation than there is from new construction. What we've also found in many particularly more advanced countries, is that young people, and they're the ones for which employers are desperate to find and hire, young people really have a preference to be in a place of character, of quality, of interest, and are less and less interested in being simply another place that was built yesterday that makes it indifferent from any place else. And then, of course, on the social side, it is our heritage resources that, in fact, are the one way that we can touch the continuity of our life, our ancestors' life, our family's life in that community. So it's an important social role. But as much as there is movement around the world, I think the other underappreciated contribution to this comprehensive sustainable development of heritage is also a way to incorporate and to educate newcomers into the culture, into the nature, into the things that are important in that local community. So it's a way to enculturate a newcomer into the community. And of course, it has this very valuable role in education for young people. Those buildings tell stories. They're the one part of memory that you can touch on, and its important contribution. And then finally, and I'll wrap up, is again, we're not tourism experts, but I was on a panel once with a guy who'd spent his entire career in the tourism industry, and he said a very important phrase that stuck with me ever since, and that was, if you do it for the locals, the tourists will come. If you do it for the tourists, only the tourists will come. And so this fundamental concept of looking inward first, what ought we do with these resources so that our local community is the beneficiary? In fact, we'll get the economic, social, and cultural benefits of heritage tourism. Thank you very much. And again, my apologies for being late.
Thank you very much, Donovan. And I would encourage everyone to keep the last two sentences in your minds, because I think they are going to be relevant for all of us. We continue with Kamran Lashari. Lashari's career, rooted in the district management group since 1979, has seen him ascend to the position of Director General of the walled city of Lahore Authority. His extensive administrative journey, including roles as Deputy Commissioner in various cities and leadership positions in institutions like the Capital Development Authority, reflects a steadfast dedication to public service. Noteworthy is his pivotal 5-year tenure as Chief Commissioner of Islamabad Capital Territory and Chairman of the Capital Development Authority, emblematic of his strategic leadership. Kamran's deep cultural engagement is evident in his leadership roles in the organizations, both national and local, in Lahore. Kamran's transformative impact on Lahore's cultural landscape is palpable. His commitment extends to heritage restoration, winning the UNESCO Award for the conservation of Shahi Hammam. In Islamabad, he played a pivotal role in developing iconic locations, showcasing a harmonious blend of administrative acumen and an unwavering passion for preserving Pakistan's rich cultural heritage for local communities. He's going to speak to us about that involvement with local communities that are at the core of his interests and his efforts to keep urban heritage alive. Kamran.
Yes, thank you very much. I extend my felicitations to you for organizing such a wonderful webinar, and I've been impressed with the very useful talk here. Now, what I'm going to mention is about this organization, which is only 11 years old, but has apparently made a good mark in the heritage of particularly Lahore and as well as other places in Pakistan. Uh, Lahore, let me introduce what it is. Lahore is the cultural capital of Pakistan. Our administrative capital is Islamabad. And Lahore is known for its history and culture. And so I am leading the organization for the rehabilitation of the old Lahore, the heritage Lahore, both tangible and intangible. Now, I'm also in partnership with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. So that's an internationally renowned body. Like any typical government organization, my team wasn't too happy to build this partnership, uh, and but I was very keen, and the government team wasn't very keen because they thought, well, somebody with more skill, knowledge will come in, they might overshadow us, and things like that. But I think it has been a very rewarding partnership. And one thing that I can say is that it's just finding, I'm not a specialist, I'm not a conservationist or anything, I'm a civil servant. But people like me or the managers, they should have one ability, and that is the ability to work, to find and work with the people of ability. That means like the Aachen Trust. So that has been a very rewarding experience. And they claim that this is the best partnership they have in 13 countries of the world that they are working in. So we have worked together and separately as well. But our main focus is on two areas. One is the community areas, the old built-up areas, the strong the streets and neighborhoods, which also include some monuments. And one is a separate monument by itself, that is the Lahore Fort. So I will confine my experience with these two places because otherwise it might become too confusing. Now, these are two different kind of experiences. One is working in a very congested place in uh, in 2.5 square kilometers. We have more than 2 million people living there. and it has 22,000 properties, and it may be rated as one of the most densely populated place, which over the time has become very, very commercial also. So now our effort is to control the commercialization and bring up and rehabilitate the residential quarters and the old look and the culture of the place. So we have started with one prototype. The Lahore walled city has 12 gates, out of which we have worked on one plus one, two gates, which mean the areas inside. And the approach to this whole rehabilitation program is very interesting. While we want the facades to come up and the monuments to be restored, the main thing is focusing upon the living conditions of the people. Now, that's something which I learned from these international experts, that whenever you go into to make it sustainable, it is important to carry the people with you, those who surround these monuments and these historic buildings. Unless they feel a sense of ownership and sense of being the beneficiaries, they will not own it up, and they will think, well, it's only some fashionable people thinking of art and history, and what's therein for us. So to make that happen, we have gone for a complete infrastructure, rehabilitation of infrastructure of these streets and neighborhoods. Our 70% of the money and effort is under the ground, which the tourists don't even get to see. But that makes it more viable, more authentic, and sustainable. We have come up with new sewerage lines, new drainage. After about 100 years, this has been changed. There were open drains; those have been covered. Now the gas lines, the metering, and the fire hydrants, and small little details have and the street surfacing. Everything has been taken care of in these very congested areas. And working in those conditions is not easy at all, because you're actually moving into their houses, and that's where they live. So I learned for the first time, despite that I was chief commissioner and development head in Islamabad, that there is something called, before you touch a building, you may have money and expertise, but you cannot touch it unless there is social clearance. Now, this was a new term for me. And so that is because you have to take the communities on board. What are you doing? When are you doing? Why are you doing? And so we have created CBOs, that is community-based organizations. And our boys and girls, they go into their homes, talk to the CBOs, and give them a full portfolio or the agenda of what we are doing. And then they tell you, well, we let you work these hours with these conditions and SOPs to follow. So then we develop a kind of a comfort line. When World Bank assessed our project, they said the best thing about your project is the community development, it's a social mobilization. Because they said, we have worked in Nigeria and many other places. You may have expertise and money, but in densely populated areas, you still do not get a breakthrough unless the people are with you. And so we are lucky now. Our credibility with the people is much more than it used to be, and they have seen the results. And we make them the local schools and other institutions to come and visit Like, for instance, the Turkish bath that we have revived, which has got the UNESCO award, is the Shahi Hammam. So while people from here and there come, but we make it sure that the locals, because I realized a few years later that the locals have not even visited the Shahi Hammam. So we made a proactive effort to bring them in and to host them and now they have started getting a sense of pride in their places, and they show me their visiting card. They say, earlier we would not tell people where we were living, and we were shy of it. Even our marriage arrangements were difficult, and people were moving out. But now, with all this rehabilitation and tourism taking place, we are now write on our visiting card that we are resident of the old city of Lahore. And they welcome the good side of the people is that they're very warm-hearted, very open-hearted and welcoming, and take them to their homes, and they're always hosting people. The downside is they are not too conscious of the hygiene and cleanliness and their civic habits. We are taken over those areas from the corporation to my own body to keep them clean and involve people also. And so over the time, some of our streets, people look at those on the social media and they say, is it Italy somewhere, or is it Spain, or what place is this? But we tell them it is Lahore and old Lahore. It's just how you keep. So what I learned is no place is good or bad. It is either badly kept or nicely kept. So it's how you keep a place, how you open and expose a place and use a space, which is more important. And to make it sustainable, one other thing is in our country, there is, I believe it may be in other countries also, there's a trend among the government bodies who own and manage these buildings to keep them very close to their chest. They they virtually shut them down. They keep it very bureaucratic, very difficult. People do not know it, or if they are informed, it's not easy to access or to have an experience. But my uh, approach has been to use the historic spaces to expose the heritage areas even at night. Now, night tourism has started for the first time in Pakistan in the Lahore Fort. We have lit up the entire fort, and it's a totally different experience. It's so splendor and magnificence in the evening with the lit up, spotlit the whole fort. And we have created a tour of 2.5 hours. It's a ticketed thing on the weekends for people to go and meet up the emperor. The story builds that you are going to meet the emperor of Hindustan, of the Shah Jahan. And so they're carried from one area to another, giving the history, and they're costumed people as if they were 4 or 5 centuries ago. And then they're taken to the harem and to the place of the emperor, and there is a Kathak dance of a boy and a girl, and then later at another space there is a Sufi dance. So people get involved, and those kind of people who had not come to the Lahore Fort and were not ready to come, because in our country it's mainly lower class who come to places like Lahore Fort. And why do they come? They come for picnic, just for outing. But people who understand history, and they are very few to visit. But now I, through my organization, was able to create reason for them to visit, and created many events many tours and conferences, and in the evenings as a date. So two new things have started: street tourism and the night tourism. These are kind of very organized. We have packaged tours for both. We have a guided tour. The guides are trained, and then there are open tuk-tuk rickshaws for people to carry, and street performers and local talent has come in, and crafts. Some new craft shops, particularly dedicated to those areas, are also part of this whole game. And whosoever is visiting Lahore, make it a point to enjoy these two things, that is street tourism and the night tourism. But earlier on, the Lahore fort would shut down before sunset, and it would open up only for state visits. And the heritage spaces were considered so sacrosanct. Some were even hidden away. We didn't know that. Even a person like me did not know certain spaces inside the Lahore fort till we got the charge of this place. So I think while we need to reduce pressure, as one of our speakers said, yes, that's very right. But at the same, it could be the other way around also. You need to build up some pressure for places which are virtually become no-go areas, and creating the right balance is something which is important. And adaptive reuse is so very important for sustainable tourism. I don't know if I'm taking more time or less time, but
I think that's just right. Thank you, Kamran. Next speaker is myself, and I will just present myself while I'm talking as well. We have actually had a great number of papers on different aspects of heritage management in relation to tourism or economic development. And you probably cannot see this slide very well, but it's just to show that the economic impact of heritage in the right pyramid is much greater than tourism. Of course, tourism brings in economic development also through infrastructure projects, through retail and services, through the creative industries. But I would really like to just say that there is more to heritage development, such as sectoral branding. Do not forget that when we consume food and drink, we very much consume heritage, retail of many other types, the creative industries, and so on and so forth. And of course, do not forget that beyond this tremendous economic potential and impact that heritage has on communities, do not forget the disclaimer that I gave in the very beginning, that heritage is actually really the end game. Culture is the end game. This is what we are actually striving for. It's not the means. Money and development is the means to achieve culture and development. And ultimately, because heritage is a constituent of our identity, it is actually really important to remember that no matter what development happens, if we don't keep our identity, a lot of these things don't matter anymore. Of course, in order to achieve these development goals, in order to achieve economic development, we need capacity. And it's not only the capacity of the local communities, which is extremely important, and I'll talk a little bit more about local communities later on, but it's also the capacity of the professionals, the heritage professionals that need to work with business, that need to work with government, that need to work with private institutions. It's the capacity of the heritage professionals that need to work with local communities. And ultimately, if you look at what the heritage professionals, most of them coming from the humanities or social sciences like art history or archaeology like myself, or sociology, anthropology, sometimes history, they end up managing budgets, people, projects. They end up having to create strategies. They end up having to promote their heritage and engage with multiple communities. They end up having to use technologies, adapt to climate change challenges, and so on. Excuse me. And so the Heritage Management Organization has really been set up to provide this training and offer this at different levels from an executive education perspective, but also kind of longer format workshops, and a master's degree that is currently being redesigned, a certificate program in heritage digitization. And ultimately, through all these different programs, the organization has trained more than 2,300 professionals from more than 110 countries. Of course, a key element, a key pillar, one of the two key pillars of the organization is community engagement. Local communities are a primary stakeholder, not only for making sure that they are a primary beneficiary, but they are the keeper of heritage. And ultimately, you have to make sure that the keeper of heritage wants that development or the other, wants tourism or not. You have to make sure that they have a primary say on what is done with their own heritage. And so we actually have a largish department of research in community engagement with heritage. And of course, all our training involves community engagement one way or another. Even fundraising training involves communities. But also community engagement is at all levels of our training, be it master's, executive, summer, or other. How do we function? Well, first of all, we actually try to map needs. So we try to do data-driven training. We are not going to be training people on things they don't want to be trained on. And we try to find the disjunction, the difference between needs in capacity and wants in capacity. You do not want to cross the old lady across the street without her wanting to, even if she might need to. Okay, so this is actually quite important. And of course, all of our training is co-op training. So it's people coming with their own projects and progressing their projects through their training. Strong online resources are always supporting the training so that it can be resilient. So we have ended up doing training in Raqqa. We have done training in Addis at the worst possible time when everybody was leaving. We've done training in the most remote parts of any continent. And so strong online resources are actually one of the elements for making that training resilient. And of course, open courses and project assistance tools also help in the same effect. Ultimately, the end game, especially for programs that we do in country, and I'll mention a few afterwards, is that we train trainers so that we are not in the very awkward and actually wrong position to be telling people how to do their job better. People are experts in their own contexts and their own professions, and they do not need someone from the outside coming to tell them how to do their work. And so I've told you about how many countries, etc. More recently, the organization has actually started since 2018 to work in particular countries, having focused programs in countries with mapping, development of training, train of trainers, and then facilitating further training that our trainers will do. And starting with a challenging program in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We are the last EU-funded project in Iran, and we are the only organization in the world exempt from sanctions to train civil servants in Iran. We have signed an MOU with the UN Economic Commission for Africa to build capacity all over the continent. And we run in-country programs with multiple partners, including the Mellon Foundation, the European Union, and the UN in the Gambia, in Ghana, Rwanda, Ethiopia. And we are also giving out small grants to the African continent, trying to build the capacity of small organizations that work there. And so that's really a small summary of the project. But I would want to just return just for a couple of minutes on one of the examples that come from Rwanda that I found the most relevant to this group here. So a lot of local communities in Rwanda actually have understood that community tourism is a great way for their development. And this is, let's say, more advanced than what happened in Greece. A lot of local communities, for a lot of good reasons and for a lot of bad reasons, do not understand that heritage can actually lead to their economic development. Unfortunately, however, most of the local communities, when you talk to them, including the experts, they will want to make sure that the local communities serve the tourists as primary stakeholders. And so we're talking about serving, so service to an outsider. We're not talking about hospitality. There's a very big difference between hospitality and service. Service can actually lead to the repetition of a lot of bad precedents. Hospitality means that you come to my place and you eat my food, and if you don't like my food, then that's okay. But if you ask me to make you your food, I will never make it as good, and you will not probably like it. But actually, you're never going to be getting a genuine experience, and I will ultimately be pretending to be someone I'm not, trying just to serve you. And a good example there is the royal cows of Rwanda. You can look them up. It's a fantastic item of heritage, where they have cattle singers, goat herds that are actually singing and serenading the cows, very often in improvisation. It's a wonderful tradition. But when you see cattle keepers, so goat herds, very often you might find the same people that are dressed up in traditional uniform at 5 o'clock, putting their suit and tie, taking public transport and going home. So that experience immediately spoils the whole thing. It actually shows that this was not really a tradition, it was just a show. And trying to make a festival that is just for outsiders is actually something that, at least in my very small mind, sounds unethical and ultimately a poor experience. So I will shut up here, and I will stop with this example that very much reflects very much of what you guys said before me. And now I have left the best for last. I will introduce Sheila Russell. Sheila is a seasoned marketing and design professional with a wealth of experience. Has spent the last 6 years in Saudi, where she has become a prolific photographer known for her distinctive style in capturing the kingdom's history, culture, traditions, and natural beauty. Her adventurous spirit drives her to explore inaccessible locations, meticulously research and document various projects, bringing stories to life and sparking curiosity in her audience. Sheila's portfolio includes documenting archaeological sites and rose production in Taif. You might see some more of that later. Earning her recognition from CNN Arabic on 6 occasions. A fellow of the Royal Geographical Society in London, she holds qualifications in marketing, horticulture, and garden design. With a background in trading fresh-cut flowers internationally and project managing diverse developments, including the renovation of a 17th century manor house in the UK, Sheila now serves as the CEO of Sands in Time, specializing in authentic storytelling and digital communication for a range of organizations and especially for sustainable tourism. So Sheila.
Hello. Thank you ever so much for introducing me with those lovely things. And thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this today. I'm going to do something slightly different. Instead of talking all the time, you won't see my face so much, maybe a little in the bottom corner, but I want to show you some photographs. So if we can get, there we go. Right. So I must admit, this is one of the most difficult things I have to do, to be able to work out what am I actually going to talk about. I could actually tell you about thousands and thousands of things. Do I talk about Daria, the home of the first Saudi state? Do I talk about Nabonidus, the last Babylonian king who came to northwestern Saudi Arabia in 552 BC and conquered that area? Do I talk about flying over Ottoman castles on the Hajj route? Do I talk about the Neolithic stone structures? But for today, I decided to actually talk about the people. This is what it's all about, is why we do this, and actually the engagement with the local communities. So this first photograph is one of my favorite ones. This is Ali Akhshouch from Taif, Wadi Mahram, and he is the sheikh in a local rose factory, and we'll come on to the roses in a minute. But before that, we're going to start our journey. So we're going to have a journey today. So come on a journey with me through 3 parts of Saudi Arabia. The first one we're going to start over is Ras Al Alma. Now, Ras Al Alma is in the Zir province, and it's the most amazing spot, which has actually been, it's one of the best tourism villages. It's on that list with the World Tourism Organization. Even to get to it, the journey is amazing. This photograph here was taken at one of the festivals, and you can see we've got some camels. So this year, 2024, is the year of the camels in Saudi Arabia. So we're likely to see lots of camels featured in everything across the board. This year, you can be classed into tangible and intangible heritage. We've got lots of different things happening here. These are the flower men. So in this area, the gentlemen wear flowers on their hair, and they're known for it in the area. So as well as the buildings, we actually have a lot of folklore and traditions that take place. Here we've got a lady doing khat. So khat is a very traditional way of the painting. Traditionally, it was done the inside of buildings just by ladies, but in more recent years with training and publicity, etc., it's now used by designers, architects, by a whole host of people. So I mentioned the intangible heritage. That's very, very important. But of course, how do we control that? How do we actually keep that for the next generation? How do we record that? So the Ministry of Culture under the Heritage Commission have got a national inventory project. So they're recording all these things for future generations, for everybody to look at. So they'll be digitalizing them, and they'll be accessible for everybody. Up until now, and I asked for some details, we've had over 7,000 have been accepted on their list. This is across the kingdom. So it could be anything to do with performing arts, oral stories, traditional craft techniques, food recipes. There is lots, and of course, in any country of the world, this will be the same. So protecting them to actually record them for future generations, so then you can make a plan of what you're going to do with them is obviously very important. So can we have the lady's going to help me because I can only do some of the slides. Can we have and we're going to go on to the next one as well. If my I wanted to show these because I wanted to show exactly how the local communities get involved. This isn't about finding something in history and getting people to do it. These are actually doing it, have been doing it all their lives. So the dancing. So the first one we saw was actually in Raj Al Alma with the lights behind it, and then the Azeri patterns, the khat, have been projected on the top. That style is from that area. And every part of Saudi Arabia, they have the local folklore. There's all very different styles. The second one was actually up in the mountains of Taif. And I'll come back to the story behind that in just a moment. The slide we've got in front of us here, this is Salim. And Salim is one of the rose farmers. You can see you've got the roses in front of him, and then behind them we've got the mushmush, which are the apricot trees which blossom. So I've many times sat in that orchard eating mala, which is the local bread, in the morning with honey and dates, and then picking the roses. The rose season goes from March to April, and it is very, very traditional. So they were brought to the area by the Turks in the 16th century, and then they're distilled in their very traditional manner. You can see the umbels here on the left-hand side. So they're cooked, and then the condensation then is captured then, so of course they're distilled. Now this process was devised by Al-Kindi. Al-Kindi was a philosopher and a teacher and mathematician in the 9th century in Baghdad. So he's come from the age of the golden age of Islam that is known around the world. So this traditional technique is still carried out today. This isn't something that's been put in for tourists. This is actually happening and has happened for hundreds and hundreds of years. And of course, the tangible with the actual roses, the things we can pick up, is linked in then to the intangible. This is Khalid here, who's holding the roses here. He's very photogenic, isn't he? And I've taken many photographs of this gentleman, and he can sing very well too. So he was one of the dancers in the shot that we had, and we had to have the two videos together, I'm afraid, because that's the way the system's set up. But on the other side here, we can see his companions then, the dancing. This is Majour. They are all ages from all different backgrounds. One was a teacher, another one a farmer, another one an air traffic controller, and they tease each other. You can see by the look in their eyes when they're actually dancing together. This is true community spirit. This is how they've developed their own community, and it is keeping going. And this is being developed through the inventory project, through the local communities, and then through tourism within the area. Now we're going to go further north to Alula. So the Royal Commission of Alula, a lot of people will be familiar with this around the world. I've got one of the tombs at the top there, Hegra. Now Hegra was the first UNESCO World Heritage Site in Saudi Arabia. A lot of people might be familiar with that, the Nabatean tombs. But I'd like to focus a little bit more on the actual old town of the people. So the old town, that's also on the UNESCO, the tourism of the best kept villages, and the best tourist villages. But what's interesting, I don't know if people know, that it's actually in two sections. So you have the winter side, which is actually on the left-hand side, where all the buildings are tightly together so they can keep warm. And then down in the actual oasis, they're actually set out with gardens around them. That's been regenerated now. So the local communities and local people, using people from around the world to come and help and advise. So taking on board, everyone sitting down and working together to regenerate all the oasis. The things that are grown there now are phenomenal. It's a wonderful place to go to. But it's lovely to be able to connect with the local people and see how the sustainability is growing and affecting everybody. Now, all the sites in the area are looked after by heritage rangers. Used to be called Rawi. They are custodians of the heritage and nature sites. And these are local people. This is true engagement. This is what a lot of people were mentioning and talking about. These are the people, they go through training. They are locals. They are looking after, preserving, and telling the stories. Very often they'll say, I remember my father telling me as a child this story about this, and when we used to come and visit that. And this is where you really get the depth. Human beings are connected by stories. These are the little things that you remember when you've been somewhere. This is what it's all about. And these people, men and women from the local area, are doing this. And as I said, the heritage rangers, their stories are amazing. So you can actually interact with the local people there. Another area which is quite close to my heart as well is the archaeology, because of course we keep learning, and there's so many, millions and millions of archaeological sites in Saudi Arabia. I spent time on the ground with the archaeologist Dr. Hugh Thomas, and the first photograph on the left is a Bronze Age pendant. You can see the location there. It's in the middle of nowhere. It took us ages to get there, climb up to the top, and I documented the whole process. The feedback was amazing. People are interested in the story. They want to come on the journey. They want to learn about it. You can see the middle section is actually him making a sondage. So it's a little test trench. And then, of course, you got that. What's interesting is, though, that a lot of the time with archaeological sites, we have no idea what's happening and what goes on. We may have the academic paper. So the best thing to do is actually to make that more inclusive. At the World Archaeology Summit in Alula back in last September, that was one of the major topics. How can we make it all more accessible? What is the future? What can we do which encourages people from around the world to learn and to gain from it? So not only do we have archaeologists of all ages coming from lots of different places and organizations around the world, there is now a new step to make some of them more accessible. On the last photograph on the right-hand side, these openings here, this is Dedan. Now, Dedan was the ancient kingdom before the Nabateans came. So we have lots of ancient kingdoms there, at the same time as Nabonidus. So I mentioned earlier, the last Babylonian king, and he conquered 6 oases, and Dedan was one of them. Now, even before that, pre to that, we had Arab queens like Shamsi, but that's for another day. As I said, I could talk for hours on all these different subjects. However, going back to Dedan, Dedan is an amazing site because, of course, it's coming up with so many different special discoveries. So that will be a test area where they'll activate it. So when there's actually archaeological work going there, people will be able to come and actually see what's happening and be able to ask what's going to happen. And that's in the planning stages at the moment. Will happen imminently. I'm very excited to be involved in actually that. It's amazing what's going on because the people can actually talk and feel it, because it's all very well going somewhere and look at something from a distance, but as everybody said, talking to the locals, involving them is one of the most important things. And I think I'm probably not far off the time. Yes, it's my timer on there. I promised I wouldn't be too long. Look, Angela, he's laughing at me. I could tell you the stories for ages. I wanted to finish with one photograph which is special to me. This is one of the most iconic images in Saudi Arabia. If you look at any of the marketing information, you'll see it's the Lonely Tomb. It's the one big tomb that stands alone in Hegra. And that's actually my daughter. And I'll say to you that taking people there, I mean, this is a couple of years ago now. She's grown up a little bit. This is what it's all about. This is why we do it. It's for us to learn, for everybody, for future generations, looking after the heritage and the culture of what we have around the world, and sharing that knowledge and making it accessible for people to learn in lots of different facets. That's what it's all about. And it's lovely to be involved in this, and the sustainability moving forward, and the fact that we're all talking about it in these organizations and these events, forums, getting together to talk about it. That's the great step in the right direction. But to actually be there and to see these things, it's a pleasure and it's an honor, and I adore doing it. So thank you very much for inviting me to show some photographs. I'm sorry, it's a very, very quick whiz through. I could talk for ages on it. And there are so many more photographs. If people want to have a look on the website, they're most welcome. If I can help anybody, that will be a pleasure in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And this is a very well-timed session. We have a couple of minutes. So if any of you would like to ask any questions to each other, you're very welcome to. And if you do, raise your real hand. I would ask anyone who would like to answer, what would you advise to a small organization that wants to communicate their impact of their work? What sort of data should they be collecting on, say, a community project when they want to capture the economic impact or the social impact of their work? Would anyone like to give me attempt an answer?
Well, I can give it a shot. And again, it varies in different places in different parts of the world. But our approach when we look at that, because much of our work is measuring the impacts of heritage, we cast a very wide net. So we started out pretty narrowly, and that is really in 4 areas, and that was the impact of local historic districts on property values, the heritage tourism component, the role of heritage conservation in center city revitalization, and the labor generation and job generation from the rehabilitation of heritage buildings. We started with those 4. And in the last 20 years, every time we do a study, we kind of add things. So we look at things now like a tenure, like diversity of populations in heritage districts, like the impacts of local heritage advocacy organizations, sometimes who take a direct role. So so I suppose we now have 30 or 35 different metrics that we've looked at to measure heritage impacts. But the really approach is just to cast a wide net. And lots of times we're just discovering things about how heritage impacts the local economy or the local environment or the local culture, simply by looking very broadly at what we might find.
Yes, Sheila.
May I add to that? Alongside that, the storytelling is a fundamental part of that, so people can actually connect with those figures. And if there's opportunity to be able to interview or tell the stories of some of the people who have impacted and see the difference, and to actually see things on their lives, people eat with their eyes with some photographs and mixed media and some short videos to balance out and to really sort of help those figures come to life is always very useful.
Thank you. And if Osama doesn't have something to add to this, I would then ask him to tell us a little bit more about whether he thinks that, as you know, having worked in many different state authorities, do you think that the ESGs are actually a useful way of communicating to state authorities or to other stakeholders? What do you think where do we use the ESGs when we're working in the heritage world? Please unmute yourself. You are muted. Yep. No, you muted yourself away.
Yeah. I think most of the government now they adopted the SDGs and involved it in its own action plans, and also the local communities and international organizations they adopted this. For example, Cisco in my presentation, I stressed this because we put in our strategic plan a field on the Excel sheet what is the exact goal of SDGs this activity is achieving in this goal in our plan. For example, for capacity building or rehabilitation of sites or restoration of archaeological sites, we put what are the SDGs that this initiative or this program or this activity will help to achieve the goal. We mentioned the goals in our action plan. And this is very important. And the local community should be have awareness about the SDGs, because most of the local communities doesn't know anything about SDG, and we should give them capacity building in this. What are the SDGs and how can they improve the knowledge about this, and how they invest in this, and how can they use this as to be a useful an instrument for them to development of their community.
It may not change the way they communicate their work.
Yes.
That's actually quite useful. So thank you very much, everybody. This is 3 minutes past our deadline, and I would like to thank everybody for listening. But also, I would very much like to thank ICCIA and Destination Events for putting together this workshop on heritage and cultural sustainability, and thank our speakers, Sheila Russell, Donovan Ripkema, Osama El Nahas, Kamran Lashari, and myself, for being able to be here at a difficult time. Chris Flynn as well, I'm sorry, and be able to come at a difficult time and short notice and give us their 2 words of wisdom for everybody's benefit. So thank you all, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.